Hello, everyone. Welcome to another live session with us at Project Control Academy. I'm very excited to have you joining us today. We are going to have an exciting session. We are going to cover a very important topic today about the construction data revolution and its impact on the future of project control. So, if you are really keen on knowing where we are in the industry, where we are heading, this session is for you. So, we're going to have a great discussion today, and I have a fantastic guest whom I'm really honored to introduce in a moment. But before doing so, please go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are, from which country you are tuning in, and why you are joining the session. Is there anything specific that you would like to explore in today's session? And I get back to you shortly. And about me, I'm Shohreh Ghorbani. I'm the founder and technical director of Project Control Academy, which is the leading global provider of training programs in project controls. And as you know, every week we come here live on different channels, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, with an expert on the topic to share their wisdom and to create a discussion. So we further support you and add value to you and also answer your questions. So this live weekly live sessions is for you to help you grow in your professional career and also to address some industry trends, some industry challenges. So have your questions coming as we start the conversation. And let's see who is here in the house. I see so far, I see Fardin joining us here. From Iran. Thank you for joining us. I see also Derek from Texas joining us. Very good to see you, Derek. Thank you so much for joining. And Sayed is also joining us from Pakistan. That's fantastic. Very good to see you all. Thanks for joining us and thanks for the introduction. Also, let us know what you would like to learn from today's session or what topic you would like to explore further. Talking about the topic, I just noticed I haven't introduced the topic yet. So, as I said, we are going to talk about the digitalization and data revolution in primarily in the construction industry and its impact in project controls. And as you know, when we talk about construction industry, many of us are in construction. And for those of you who are in construction, you know, it has been known for its slow adoption to new technologies and to especially digitalization. But as you know, if you've been part of the content that we've been sharing, we have recently also shared about the digital collaboration in construction. So you know that it's coming, it's already there. Some people are taking advantage of new tools and technology in construction and making wonders in their projects. So, and digitalization has already started to transform the construction industry, and us in project controls has a big impact into that. And especially in the recent years, we have gone through a lot of changes and a lot of revolution with the new tools and technologies in project controls. But the question is where we are now in construction industry and what the impact of these new tools and technologies are in project controls. I mean, the impact of it for project controls and how we can make the change and where we are. So these are all the great topics that we are going to talk about today. And in regards to today's session, I'm very excited for having this fantastic guest who is a technologist and innovator himself, and he's currently serving as the CEO of SmartPM. Make sure you check that great solution that they offer. Very impressive. But about my presenter and guest speaker, Michael Pink, he used to be part of us. I mean, he still is, but bringing solution to the industry. He used to be a consultant and project control expert who turned to be a technologist and innovator. And today he's going to discuss his views on where we are in project controls today with the current data revolution in especially construction. And again how the future looks like for project controls, especially with the automation and augmentation. So it's going to be a very interesting topic that we are going to talk about. Again, have your questions coming, and let's see, and let's get ahead of the game by knowing where we are heading in this industry. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome Michael to join me in this virtual platform, and please help me give a warm welcome to Michael Pink, the CEO of SmartPM. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So, to start the conversation, Mike, let's start with understanding of project controls. First of all, before we move toward all these fancy lands of the technology and where we are heading, tell us what do you think, or your definition of project control? Because still to this day, not many are clear on this function and what we do at project controls. So, can you clarify that concept for everyone before we dive into the rest of the discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. Some people may think that project controls are, just processes embedded in construction and looking at schedules or, putting payment applications in place. But, what I look at it is it's taking information, it's taking data, it's applying analytical processes to predict, understand, and influence project outcomes. Um, and then communicating that information effectively amongst the stakeholders involved, whether it's at the site level, whether it's at the corporate level, whether it's the owner, the contractor, architects, taking that information and making it speak such that better outcomes are made in construction, to me, is what project controls is, and it's all driven through data.
Fantastic. Great response, Mike. That's great. So, how about the maturity level? Where we are in the industry in terms of the maturity in project controls, Mike?
I feel like we're early. If you think about, well, I can only look at it from my perspective. I entered this industry about 20 years ago, right in 2000, 2001 timeframe. And, I was supposed to collect this information and understand it to help people better understand historically what happened on their projects for disputes. Also help them better understand what does the data tell them today. And I was digging through boxes most of the time. So there wasn't much information out there, and then over time, up until now, I mean, you saw this technology revolution, and it's started to digitize things, but we're still early. Project management solutions are automating a lot of processes, a lot of very important processes, but getting to the level of data analytics that is necessary, and even looking at the industry of how many companies actually have project controls teams, it's very few. I mean, ENR 200 alone, I studied that, about half of them actually have project controls teams. So I feel like we're early and there's a lot to do.
Wow. So we are not there yet. I've been in project controls for 20 years, and still, I feel like the pain that we are experiencing in this industry. And it's surprising to hear that, like you talked about the project control teams and the maturity level that we are just starting. So that's interesting. I also saw a report recently that, yeah, the project control teams, with companies that have a well-established project control team has a higher success rate. But you are saying that even we are not there in terms of having a well-established team, then how about the technology? Then, if we are not there yet in terms of the maturity, Mike, would these new tools and technology would help us to be better? Or first, we need to have the foundation in place before implementing all these great tools and technology?
I think the foundation is there. I think if you look around and over the past decade or so, if you were looking at the industry for what it was, back 20 years ago when I started, there was some scheduling technologies, there was some quasi project management solutions, but until cloud computing became a thing and mobile devices became a thing, there was some disconnectivity to the sites. And once that happened, once we had that technology in place, it enabled corporate offices to, essentially connect to the site, and mobile devices to start to, embed processes and workflows into the overall process. And what happened in that was data started to become electronic data started to exist. And now more and more companies, I think mostly all companies these days, have some sort of connectivity to the site where information's getting sent to and from the site, and it's via, software. And then that essentially takes this data and makes it analyzable rather than it being written down on paper, right? That's like what I was saying before. When I was first consulting, most of what I did was dig into documents and build out spreadsheets and analyze the data, build out these databases of information. But now all that data is becoming available through these systems. And then simultaneously in that time, there's been a lot of advancement in analytics, even manual analytics. And that's what, I was doing in Excel. Many other consultants were doing as well. And over time, many project controls people and schedulers, they seem to all have their way of looking at things. And now technology companies have started to augment these things. So the data is available. The processes have been figured out. The analytics that work well towards understanding projects and predicting outcomes is now available and useful. Now it's becoming augmented, and I think that it's the time where this can start to really move the industry. Now, going back and thinking about how many actual project controls people there are, it's not nearly enough to manage or be embedded in every single project. But once you throw technology into the equation and start to educate others about these analytics and how they're useful, and you have these processes augmented, we start to get to a point where it can scale across the industry.
That's fantastic. And I love the story you've shared, Mike, that you started in project controls, you started gathering data and consolidate that. And now you're a technologist and innovator. Can you walk us through your journey and how did you got started and where you are now before we go through the rest of the conversation?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So, yeah, I was working in my first job was at KPMG in their construction consulting group. I ended up changing a couple different companies, ended up at Deloitte, but really what we did a lot of was dispute resolution work. That's when consultants get a lot of phone calls, is when there's a claim and when there's arguments and overruns and people are trying to ferret out the details. And, so I got thrown right into that. And I guess in the beginning, my job was to essentially take data, make it speak, and make it speak better than anybody who actually lived the job. Know more about a construction job that was actually on its last, couple months or even over than the people who actually lived it, such that, you could determine why there were overruns, why there were delays, who was responsible, and be right. And it was interesting to me that I could come into a project after the fact and know so much about it. It was interesting to our customers as well. But that got me to thinking, why are we waiting so long? Discussion. The data was there somewhere. You just had to organize it and you had to analyze it. And if you were to do that in real time, you would actually understand these issues before they really manifested into costly problems. And I wanted to really start to look at how do we better leverage that data and how do we make it scalable to more projects. People weren't necessarily calling consultants early on in a job to say, help me not end up off the rails. Construction's it's a tight industry with tight budgets. It's lean. You have skeleton crews. It's competitively bid. So nobody's sitting there at the beginning of a job unless it's like a mega project, trying to, control risk, especially once you start getting into these 30, 40, 50, $100 million projects. It's just not part of the budget. But they all have this issue. There's not necessarily a lot of visibility of data and what it all really means. And it wasn't necessarily being used proactively. And the only answer to me, given the fact that the industry doesn't have nearly enough people that can actually do this, and it's such time-consuming work, was to build a computer program. Now, we were building out, various macros in Excel, but it just wasn't good enough, right? You couldn't take a macro in Excel and just apply it to all different project teams and be able to teach them how to use it. So and at the same time, the computers weren't, the processing power of computers wasn't enough to do all the calculations that were necessary as quickly as it needed to be. So, that got me to thinking about how do we how do we leverage the technology today, cloud technology, and all the data sets that are available to funnel into a system to start to systematically analyze it in real time? And that's what eventually I left my consulting world to start to build a product that could do that. And one of the areas that I really focused on, and I think is probably the most useful data set in construction, is the schedule. Usually when I was on a project and I was asked to figure out what happened, or where's our risk, or how do we correct the problems that have happened to date. To me, it was the schedule that always gave me as much information as I needed to do those things. So that's really where I started to focus, is how do we leverage schedule data better, and how do we help repair that process that's not necessarily up to snuff in terms of best practices.
Wow, quite impressive, Mike. Like starting from the ground, knowing the pain we've been experiencing, trying to find a solution, building a company upon that. Big shout out. That's great. Like I hope each one of us in this field have the same attitude to go and find the solution. That's quite impressive. Thank you for sharing your journey with us, Mike. Now, again, I'm curious to know, you mentioned about the schedule metrics, and you try to find a solution for that. Yeah, I agree. Like when it comes to schedule, first of all, we don't know what metric to properly extract from the schedule. And second, if we want to do that, it's a lot of work, like from, let's say, P6 or MS project, getting the data in Excel and try to come up with the graphics or with the metrics or KPIs. Can you shed more light on that? Again, I know we are talking about the data revolution, but I think this is one of the areas that many of us are struggling, especially with the schedule analytics and how we can extract the right data from the schedule so that we can communicate the schedule delays effectively and help the team understand what's causing the issues and how we can mitigate those. I think the industry is lacking on that aspect, but what you have done about that, Mike, I appreciate if you shed more light on that.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll explain to you why I think that the schedule data is powerful. And then I'll tell you some of the issues that we saw in that data and how to go ahead and correct that. So the schedule data, why is it so powerful to me? So if you think about a construction project, it's a series of things that need to get done over time, and they're all these activities are in one way, shape, or form interrelated to get to that end goal. If you're not studying the schedule data and you're only really looking at cost data or manpower data, it doesn't really show you how everything's interrelated to ultimately get to that, starting point to that ending point. And the schedule is what explains all that through the activities, and more importantly, the relationships embedded within that schedule file. What comes before what comes before what streams of activities can be happening at the same time, and in what order. All of that information turns a project into a system that starts on day one, and then a series of things happen in a specific order. And we all know that things never really go as planned, and reactions need to happen. But that data, starting with the baseline and then the subsequent updates of progress and then changes, is really sort of what explains that, system of construction. So that to me is the foundation of all analytics, is getting acquainted with that schedule. Now, doing it manually is time consuming. I mean, you could study a project every day, for an entire year, and still have more to do if you want. There are quicker analytics that you can still use that schedule for, but if you want to get as deep as you can possibly get, there's a lot of it would take a lot of time to do that. So what we did is looked at the scheduling process. First and foremost, on a lot of the projects I worked on, the schedules may or may not have been, of good quality, telling you the right things. If you think about critical path scheduling, it's all about understanding the critical and near critical paths to manage to an end date. That critical path is what ties from today until the end date, such that if there were any delays on that path, it would push the end date out. And what we saw, period after period after period, usually there's delays and then there's changes made. So we first fixed quality of schedule, making sure that it's complete, making sure that it follows best practices. There's a methodology out there called the Defense Contractors Management Association Schedule Quality Checker, DCMA methodology. There's a 14-point check that you can take a look at and make sure that you're following all these rules. But to me, that's not necessarily appropriate for every single project type. And there's many more analytics that you can be looking at as it relates to the processes and structural integrity of that schedule. So we've created, first and foremost, the ability to gauge quality on a spectrum instead of more of a, did it follow all these rules or did it not? A lot of people in construction don't necessarily know how big a certain risk is. Things like missing logic, things like high durations, things like, too many constraints or the types of logic embedded within. So we've created a grading structure that, is customizable. And users on different project types and different sizes can customize, and even with different teams that are following different bad practices, you can control those things using our grading structure. And that, to me, is the foundation of it all, is making sure that the schedule is built with best practices and worthy of managing a job effectively, where it tells you things that are trustable and the critical paths are reliable for decision-making purposes. Once you get past that, then you can updates and compare and contrast what was supposed to happen and what actually happened, and was there critical path delay. That's really where I spent a lot of time understanding is what was delayed. And then at each update, it's another opportunity to determine, okay, what was delayed, but what was the response to those delays? And is the schedule maintaining that quality or not? Are the decisions being made putting compression into the plan that would ultimately result in the need to accelerate? How are we trending? What's going to be driving this end date down the road? We might have a critical path that we see today, but what's the likely critical path a year from now? These are all things that we are leveraging our program to be able to do. And it actually, just to me, adds a level of automation to the project controls process that if we don't have that automation, we don't have the resources in terms of time and people to actually be able to do these things. You are muted.
Yeah, I was muted.
There you
That's
go.
quite impressive, Mike. Thank you for sharing more about the way that we can extract more analytics from our schedule. Again, I highly recommend everyone to check SmartPM. Here is the link again. Yeah, they have Mike is behind the innovation of this great tool and solution for us to extract some amazing real-time dashboard from our schedule, and to better analyze and communicate the schedule status and performance to the team. So I highly recommend you check that out. But yeah, since you addressed that, Mike, I really wanted to know what the solution was related to the schedule digitalization and the schedule metrics. Because if we can, as you said, if we can have metrics and dashboards and measurements, then a lot of the issues can be going away. So thank you so much for shedding more light about that. Now, going back to the topic of digitalization in construction. So where we are in there as a technologist and innovator, Mike, are we there yet, or still we have a long way to fully digitalize the construction industry? Can you tell us the state of the innovation and digitalization in the perspective of project controls in construction, where we are there?
I still, again, think we're early, right? We're just getting, a lot of these processes have been figured out. A lot of these analytics have been augmented. There's hundreds of tools out there that are doing different things, collecting different data. The world I see 20 years from now is a lot more automation. If you think about it, all the parts and pieces are in place, right? We've got digitized design, that's BIM. We've got the ability to understand cost as it relates to that design, through means, that sort of thing. We're learning more about scheduling. We're getting a better understanding of what works and what doesn't, and what constitutes a good schedule and what level of detail needs to be in that. So now you're starting to merge the world of design, cost, and scheduling all in one place. And then, what I think is the next wave is understanding all of that data in one place, right? So once you merge those three worlds together, you can start to then plan versus actual, cost, schedule, as built design, understanding all that, and then pulling it into one place, and then getting into the day-to-day information, which is embedded into the project management platforms of what's ongoing, how much work's being performed, converting that into productivity metrics. Now, the only difference there is that, if you look at how PMs and supers operate, the good PMs and the good supers are good because they've got this experience. They've got it all in their head. But once you start getting hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of data sets that really build out that design versus cost versus schedule versus performance versus risk and versus final outcomes all in one place, and you can study that using things like machine learning and AI, you become very knowledgeable about the industry in ways that no system has ever been able to do. So all the parts and pieces to me are in place, but they need to be interconnected. The data needs to be pulled into a central database, and there needs to be meta tags associated and put into some context so that we can understand different sectors, different projects. But once you have all that information, these computers can start thinking and start testing out decisions and optimizing processes based on everything that it can learn from all of that data, starting from the plan to what's actually happening. And I envision a world where that computer does exist, and I think that it's going to be very interesting. The industry will become optimized. That was the issue in a lot of other industries. They're not optimized, but now they've become optimized. It's construction's turn now. And it's going to take a lot of information. It's going to take a lot of integration. It's going to take a lot of computer power understanding these things. And then once it does, you end up in a place where consistency is there, predictability is there, and accuracy is there, and projects will be done on time and on budget, all the time. And I think that one of our biggest missions in our company is to create an environment where disputes are no longer. Nobody likes the dispute. Nobody likes the overrun. Nobody likes the claims. There's a way to get there, and it revolves around all this different sort of data that we're talking about. But to me, again, the foundation is all in the scheduled data.
Wow, very well said, Mike. So, talking about the data, as you know, in project controls, we are dealing with a ton of data from project. But what data, we should start off with, what data is most useful that we could and we should or must gather and start analyzing at the starting point, no matter what the maturity level of project controls or data digitalization is in our organization. What should be the starting point, and what data we should start analyzing, Mike?
Well, I'm a biased guy, but like I said, I think scheduled data is a good foundation, but it needs to be applied to the design in and of itself. You need to know what a scheduled activity is talking about. A 10-day electrical activity is not much to know, other than they're doing electrical in a certain area, and it's going to take 10 days, right? I'd like to know exactly how much installed material needs to go in place, and I'd like to know how many hours it should take. And then I'd like to visualize progress over time, collecting that data from the field of showing that progress out, that percent complete into the schedule, and then capturing those man hours and then converting it into an actual cost. All of that, if you do that using the schedule, and if you apply that information to each activity, and then you study it over and over and over on different jobs, that's where you start to really understand construction. That's where you can estimate manpower. That's where you can estimate cost. But it is tying, what is a schedule activity? What does it represent? How many man hours are supposed to be associated with it? How much is it supposed to cost? What sort of equipment will be required to put it in? What sort of material costs will there be? If you have all that information, and you have that across even one full project, and then you do it across another project and another project and another project, and you allow a supercomputer to understand all of that, that's where we get to a place where project controls is, not only automated, but as effective as it can be across the entire industry.
Very well said, Mike. Yeah, I love the fact that you said about the data gathering and yeah, the importance of different sort of information and data we need so that we can benchmark our data for future projects and for forecasting. That's where we are and where we are heading. So that's what we do at Project Control. So thank you so much for um, highlighting the importance of that. So, and I assume when we have the data and hopefully the structured data and we start gathering the data, then we can leverage machine learning and AI and those superpowers that you mentioned. But where the industry is at the moment with these new technologies, with AI and machine learning, I know there has been some innovations going on when it comes to project controls and predictive analytics and with the use of AI and machine learning. Have you implemented some in your own company or are you looking into that? And if you just shed more light on that, I know again we are very early on AI, machine learning, and how we can let the machine to predict where we are heading in our projects, because again we don't have that much structured data yet, or we haven't done a good job in gathering the data. But if you can just shed more light on where we are in there and where we are heading in, let's say, in the next 5 years in that aspect of predictive analytics.
Sure, I do. I'll first say that yes, we are just starting to scratch the surface at our company. We've got, I think, probably about 1,500 projects in the system and about 18,000 schedules. So the first layer of our AI was understanding our own data, understanding our analytics across our data sets and seeing what we can learn from that to make our product even better, right? For instance, schedule quality. What percentage of projects are doing good versus poorly in terms of building good, effective schedules? And the numbers are pretty bad. I mean, it's a little staggering that we'd say something like 80% of projects have schedules that are at a high risk, medium to high risk of being ineffective. So what do we do with that information? We start to understand, well, what's driving that? Of the 30 or so indicators out there, where can we drill in and understand what issues are driving that risk most? And missing logic would be one big one. Activities that don't have a predecessor or successor. The other one would be crew logic. Crew logic's missing in a lot of schedules, and crew logic being, putting those logic ties that represent one trade going from area to area to area. And those in and of themselves are big risk issues for even producing an accurate critical path. So what we've done with that is started to leverage, AI in determining where should crew logic go and how can we place that in. And that's really just one very simple metric that we're looking at now. But, it started with looking at all that data. Now, understanding, true durations and understanding as built logic, not what the logic said in the schedule, but what logic actually occurred, how trades really move from area to area to area, and comparing that across different projects will start to enable us to produce schedules that have sound logic that's accurate and sound durations. And that's really, to me, how you get predictable. And then studying performance against that in real time and applying everything you're learning on a specific project and applying that into the future will give us information on, where is this project really headed from a timing perspective, and what trades are going to drive that, given what we, regardless of what the logic says in the schedule, what we've learned across many, many different projects. So, I think we're early here. There's so much that can be done. And we're very excited to be working on that. And I'm looking forward to the next couple of years getting more and more embedded into AI and machine learning. But then thinking about all the other types of products out there, AI is a term, lots of people like it, but when you start to really look around and see how it's being utilized, it's not being utilized very much. And it can be, and it will be. And it all starts with the collection of that information and then understanding what does this mean. But then you've got to train it, right? AI isn't just going to plug in and figure things out. You actually have to train it. And that's what we're training our systems to do right now is think like a consultant, think like a project controls person, identify areas that we can to improve upon, and then let the computer continue to iterate on that.
Very well said, Mike. And talking about that, I think the current challenge we are at the moment facing in our projects and in our organization is not doing a good job capturing the data, even the basic data. So you just mentioned some of the advanced data that we need to have in place so that we can really have all this sort of data that can help us to predict and forecast. But unfortunately, we even don't do a good job in gathering the project data, or we even don't do a good lesson learn after the project is over. So it seems that every time a new project starts, it's kind of starting from scratch all over again. What is your recommendation as a technologist, as someone who has been in project controls for years, see the pain in the industry? So to be able to move toward this predictive analytics, to be able to leverage these new technologies like AI, as you mentioned, what we need to do as a project professional in an organization who has not embraced these new technologies yet, what should be the starting point for us so that we make sure when we are ready, we can leap into that new technologies?
Well, I think, there's different data that I always like to look for. When I'm trying to understand progress and performance and productivity and cost, right? It's really hard to capture it all at the granular level that is required to actually leverage it as best as we can. So I think first and foremost, people should be thinking along the lines of, cost loaded, resource loaded schedules. Most people don't do that. I think it's powerful. If you even just use Primavera or Microsoft Project and you spend the time to estimate out resource needs as well as costs, you can get a lot out of that in and of itself, based on your plan. You can see how many resources are required at any given point in time. And then you can measure against that as well by capturing actuals, right? And that, 95, 96% of schedules do not have nobody takes the time to actually put in those resources or those costs. I think that in and of itself is something everybody should consider doing. And then tracking, on each activity that's being worked, how many people were there, how much progress was made. I think drones and, robots should be quantifying progress and know what that means in terms of as-built data. And there's plenty of companies out there that are doing a very good job of starting to quantify progress and performance via, things collecting the data for you instead of people estimating progress. So I look at that as the next stage. So thinking about making sure you're set up for success by applying the cost loaded, resource loaded schedule. That in and of itself will help contractors know exactly how many resources, making sure that the schedules are reliable and understandable and the critical paths are accurate will help them prioritize those resources. And then comparing actuals to make sure that your durations are accurate and applying that while getting progress data fed into that system as well is powerful. And making sure that progress data is accurate is important. So all of those things can be done manually. They're not. And I know it's because it's time consuming and time is short in the industry. Not a lot of people have extra time. But technology is coming that are facilitating better ways to do that. For example, with our technology through our AI, we're going to be able to merge cost and resource planning directly into the schedule without actually, needing somebody to think through it. But that's a ways away for us. For now, if there's anything you can be doing, I think the power of that cost loaded, resource loaded schedule is good. Leveraging data, leveraging robots or that sort of thing to capture progress data and monitoring the performance over time is important.
Yes, I love the fact that you said we can start by just resource loading our schedule. And that's this simple task is not done by many of us in project controls. And I think many look at it as, oh my God, it's too much work. Is it adding value? So we are just doing cost separate, schedule separate, integration is not there. So I love the fact that we should start from that. So just out of curiosity, Mike, how should we store the data? Let's say we start with the cost and schedule integration inside P6 or inside any scheduling tool that we are using. And we are also extracting great metrics out of schedule, hopefully with the help of tools like SmartPM. Oh, I was talking to myself. I didn't notice I muted Mike.
Well, we only muted for about 5 seconds.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I forgot where I was.
You
Yeah,
said,
so I was
how
asking.
should we be storing this data?
Yeah. So how, like, you mentioned that you started by analyzing the data in the companies you've been involved in and now innovating a tool, but how we can, like, as a starting point, where should we store this information so that we can tap into that whenever we need that? So, because again, those people and teams working on the project keep changing. So, is this a central data or a knowledge-based data that we need as a starting point to leverage AI and new technologies, or yeah, starting with the cost and schedule integration, but after that, how we can store these metrics and how we can have them available. Any suggestions on that? If we can,
Yeah,
any ideas?
I can give you my experience of what I'm seeing out there and what I believe in. I think the cloud, putting that it's massive amounts of data, and cloud storage can contain that data. All these data centers that are getting built, they've got plenty of room to be storing this data. So a lot of our customers, especially some of the bigger contractors we work with, are collecting all their information and building data warehouses and data lakes, they call them, in the cloud, and then using these massive databases of information and applying algorithms to them to start further analyzing that information, and then even plugging them into, dashboard tools like Power BI or Domo. So first and foremost, by leveraging the cloud, you can get a lot more visibility. They are funneling in cost data. A lot of them are using our analytics and funneling our analytics and our schedule data into their data lake, and then pulling this all together, and even using their project management platforms. And they're getting these nice dashboards that tell you a lot in one place, even on the current project. But having that data in that cloud, we have other customers that we're working with, large consulting firms that are now, capturing a lot of data across all of their clients, and then understanding it using things like AI. But you can't house all that on a computer. You need to have it somewhere accessible that can carry a lot of volume. I mean, for example, today alone, we had about 100 servers running just on a few projects that were loaded into our system simultaneously. I mean, there was about 100 projects getting run at the same time when people loaded their schedule data. It's getting on every day, and there's so much computing power necessary. So I say leverage the cloud the best you can, create that data lake, create those data warehouses, make that data visible all in one place, but then go to the next level and start to understand all of your projects thoroughly, and start to really understand what low-hanging fruit do we see here that's causing impacts, or that's impacting our bottom line. And that's where businesses can start getting better at being construction businesses, by identifying those patterns in all of their data.
And to identify patterns, Mike, do we need to have a standard structure for data, or it doesn't matter what the data, let's say we have different WBS, different structures for our data, and still we can analyze the trends? Is that the way to go, or we need to first work on standardizing our data and information before moving ahead with the technology? What do you think on that?
Oh, I absolutely agree that it needs to be standardized. If you've got five different people managing things five different ways, and it's inconsistent, there's no real ability to make it apples to apples. So I would say that's a very important point, that you need to be putting in some sort of consistency into the model, so that electrical activity is an electrical activity, or this WBS means this thing. If it's so inconsistent, that's just, it'll make the data worse. It'll make the analytics less effective. So yeah, that in and of itself is a huge control, is to be consistent across your organization, and in the nomenclature and the organizational structures that you're using for this data.
Fantastic. So I think everything starts with us first to understand the importance of the data, capturing the data in a structured way, in an organized manner, in a cloud, as you said, so we can have an access to that. And I think that would be the starting point to be able to leverage the technology that is in our fingertips, and we can leverage that if we just do those groundwork first. So we have a good question here by, I'm going to highlight the question here for you, Mike. So by Arpan, so he's saying AI, yeah, will be based on the data, more the accuracy. So the question is how to get good and accurate data so that we can leverage that data and new technologies for our projects, especially for having more accurate forecasts. So how do we ensure the data we are entering in is accurate?
I think technology is required. User error is a problem in construction. So, for instance, these products out there that are actually capturing progress data based on a mathematical approach is to me more accurate than a super or a PM walking around and going, looks like it's about 50% complete. Manpower is running around. We can't rely on them to say exactly what they did and where they stood, but technology could tell you those things. So I would say the best way to get the most accurate data is to, look around and find the technology that can, ensure that. Because, garbage in, garbage out is a real issue. Relying on humans to go quantify these things when technology will do it accurately and effectively. Is probably the better way to go.
Okay, perfect. We have another good question here by Anne, and the question is when approaching from a PM company perspective, where we aren't a contractor, what are some best practices for working with the general contractors to capture some of the site specific data? Yeah, I agree. Like capturing the site data and from the construction is always a challenge. So, what do you think about that question, Mike?
Well, again, going back to what I was saying before, the most detailed set of information that interconnects everything is in the schedule. So putting good contract language about capturing and updating the schedule with accuracy and reliable information, that's, schedules are built with good quality. I think that starts with the contract. And then it continues with oversight and analytics of that information. That's to me the best data. Now, when it comes to what's going on day to day, knowing where people are working, what are they doing via the dailies, the more you can be granular on that, the better. Timesheet data, making sure that all of this, how we're associating the information is consistent. I prefer to assign it to the schedule, maybe at the activity level. Maybe requiring that when you do your daily reports, hopefully they're being done electronically, and that when people are reporting their timesheets, that they're assigning their time to a specific activity, and then being able to grab progress information that's accurate and dependable, and overlaying that as well starts to give you all the items necessary to get to that level of understanding that's effective.
Fantastic, thank you. And we have a nice comment from one of our YouTube people who are watching us here, Solid, that they absolutely love you, Mike. So thank you so much for sharing
Thank
that.
you.
Great comment. Thank
I
you for
love all of
sharing.
you.
Yeah, so now another question here is by Abdurrahman. So the question is actual values need to be collected using AI system. I think this is the perfect way for accurate output data, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I also think that going back to that question about how do we set up for success, that's where you really understand. If you can get actual data and compare it to plan data and associate it even down to that activity level and do it with accuracy, you start to learn what overruns are, to the, granular level. And then by studying the delays and the inefficient and trade stacking and all that kind of stuff that you can get from the schedule, you start to really understand what's driving inefficiencies and where are those and how much is it costing. So yeah, plan versus actual to me is great. Using AI to capture that actual data to me is more accurate, but it always does need to be applied to what the plan was, so that we can understand where things didn't go as planned and how much it cost, and then associate it back to the causation for those items, and then start to understand if there's any patterns here to address so that we can move forward with a better process and a better outcome.
Very well said, Mike. So I think that's capturing all the questions we've got from our fantastic audience. If you have any questions, bring them on. So we just are 5 minutes away from adjourning the session. But before we finish this fantastic conversation we have, Mike, I would like you to shed more light on Smart PM because I really love what you have created for project controls and especially on the scheduling metrics we can tap into and extracting more from our schedule. So tell us a bit more on the innovation and this fantastic technology and how we can utilize that for our own advantage.
Sure. So we know we learned through the process of starting from the ground up that a lot of automation needs to be in place, and we spent a lot of time automating a lot of these analytics that I believe and have seen are valuable. That's number one, and the analytics are wide, starting with gauging quality. Is this schedule trustable, useful? Is it accurate? Is it dependable? Using a methodology for that, and then studying performance based on that at each update, looking at delays, looking at impacts, looking at changes, looking at compression, looking at feasibility. There's many different things we can do. In addition to all of that, we don't look at it just for the overall project. We also break the project up into parts and pieces based on key milestones, grades, really exposing a lot of good information that you can get from scheduled data in and of itself. But the second more important part of our program, to me, is making it understandable to the broader audience, in visuals, right? Being able to speak to others that are not necessarily people who schedule for a living, or analyze schedule data for a living. The people who need that information to, ultimately control outcomes. If you go back to what the definition of project controls is, it's analyzing data to control outcomes, and putting it into good visuals so that everybody can understand it and communicate around it. That's really encompasses all that we're doing with this information. And then the third step, like I mentioned, is now getting into understanding collective data, either at the company level or even the industry level, based on the information that we can get, and then studying that data to learn from it and see things that I never knew existed, problems that I see in the industry now that you just can't get from one project to the next, until you look at them all side by side. But then in and of that, you've got to have that framework. That's what we do with our AI, is develop that framework that makes it apples to apples. So all of those different things are what we're working on. And the other thing is learning from our customers. We work very closely, and we enable our customers to give us, their wish list of items or areas that they don't understand, or things that we need to improve upon, or ideas that they have, or metrics that they want to see. We meet with them, we discuss them, we hear from all of them. We give them a nice avenue to feed us that input. And then we go discuss and see who's asking for what, and what should be a priority based on our understanding, and based on how many times different people have asked for different things. So that's essentially our business in a nutshell, and how we've been operating.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Again, I highly recommend everyone to check smartpmtech.com and see how it can help you with bringing more visibility into your schedules. And yeah, we talk about a lot of great content today and a lot of great things when it comes to technology. Before I wrap up, I see a quick question by Sammy. I would like to cover that question and then we quickly wrap up. So Sammy is saying, yeah, we talk about the importance of capturing the actual data. And sometimes we don't get the actual data, right? Sometimes we need to estimate those actual data or plan or estimate values. And he's saying most of the time they're far from accurate. So any thoughts on that to rectify this issue?
Yeah. I mean, going back to what I used to do manually is that was what I saw was like the industry's optimistic at best, overly optimism bias and that sort of thing exists in this industry. And that's part of what makes this industry so great is how people, overcome lots of challenges to still deliver, maybe not on time, maybe not on budget, but then we get this competitive bidding process that, time and time again, people say they can deliver, quicker and cheaper than maybe what's possible. And then they walk into these projects with that understanding. I do agree that capturing all this actual data in an objective way and looking at it across industry needs to be leveraged so that people can, really trust or at least decipher whether or not a timeline and a budget's even achievable. And I think that actual data will help us there. But going back to what your comment is about the actual circumstances surrounding the actuals, that was a huge deal. Was you needed to understand what the impacts, if any, were happening in real time. You need to be recording that. Like, for instance, it rained, or something didn't show up on time, or there was an RFI, or the trade that's working on this thing only had half the people, or their productivity was suffering because of X, Y, and Z. You do need to decipher whether or not this is a resource or cost or duration miscalc based on a reason, or if it was just estimated poorly. And yes, I agree 100% that definitely needs to be recorded and understood in order to ensure that you get more accurate predictions and estimates up front. But it all should be in one place and understood, and then utilized through a benchmarking process as well, because the owners need to, and insurance companies need to, and even contractors need to start thinking about whether or not what they are agreeing to is even achievable. And actual data will get us there, but it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of studying, a lot of computers doing the studying. But I agree with that statement.
Very well said, Mike. Thank you. So we're almost at the end of our session. Just to wrap up the great wisdom you shared today, Mike, we talk about where we are in our industry with the innovation, and you mentioned that we are just starting and scratching the surface when it comes to AI, machine learning, and we also realize it all starts with us by capturing the data and different sort of data, and it can all start by just resource loading our schedule at the starting point and capturing those data so that we can be ready when we are ready to leverage those technologies. So and also we talk about the data accuracy, our input. So a lot of great things we discussed today. So just I would like to, and also we learned a little bit about SmartPM and how you can leverage your scheduling data into more visual metrics and KPIs. So is there any final comments that you would like to add, Mike? And I also want to know your vision on where you think we are heading in project controls, especially with the advancement of technology in the near future, let's say 3 years from now. Where do you think we will be? And if you have any final comments, we are here to hear from you.
Yeah. Only final comment I have is thank you so much for including me in having this great discussion today. I think I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the questions as well. But in terms of where are we headed, I think we're headed to a point where more and more companies are going to be leveraging project controls, right? Project controls is going to be more understood. More and more companies are going to have that data analyst, right? Even getting down into the smaller GCs, right? If you look across the board, like I mentioned before, only 200 of the ENR 400 have people that are titled or working as part of a project controls division. The other 200 might have some schedulers. And then once you get past that, and we're starting to study ENR 401 to ENR 2000, none of them really have those people. PMs are doing a lot of the scheduling, and executives are doing a lot of the oversight, and there's not that in between team. I think technology is going to merge that gap, but more and more companies are going to see the value of this data because more and more tools are leveraging this data to help get better outcomes, and it's working. So once we get to that point, I think we'll see in 3 years that large percentage of the construction companies out there actually are taking project control seriously. And I think that in and of itself a huge step.
Wow, I hope so, Mike. We will come back to this video 3 years from now and see if your prediction is right.
Hope I am. I hope it is.
Yeah, but I hope so. You are absolutely right. Even many organizations don't know what project controls can do for them. As you said, they have their PMs doing project controls to some extent. Actually, not last week, the previous week, we exactly covered that the bridge between project controls and project management. And we're going to have a master class soon in September about this topic as well, because we see that's kind of a gap in our industry as well. Not many organizations are embracing project controls. Sorry for my phone. Yeah, so, and it's really good to hear from you that hopefully more and more people and organizations know the importance and the value that project controls can bring to the table. And of course, with the help of new tools and technologies, we can bring more accurate data and more accurate predictions so we can even better serve the projects with what we can do. But thank you so very much, Mike, for this insightful discussion that we had today. I hope the audience also enjoyed that. And I don't see any more questions coming here. So I would like, and we are right on time. So talking about the schedule, we are right on schedule, Mike. So
Nice. No
thank you.
delays.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Mike. Again, everyone, I highly encourage you to go and check smartpmtech.com to see how you can leverage the scheduled data more effectively in your projects. And if you find this session informative, please share it with your connections so others also benefit from this discussion. So until next week, when we come back with another fantastic experience and another great topic to discuss, I wish you all the best and see you next week. Thank you, everyone. Bye
Thanks
for now.
again. Have a good one.
Thank you.